Hello, it's Keatron Evans back again. This course is designed to get you comfortable using the Linux command line or shell. I'll be using the Infosec Skills platform for part of this course, and if you don't have a Linux terminal or a Linux VM to work with, this is an excellent time to get your own skills account at www.infosecinstitute.com/skills. And then sign up using my Evans50 code and get it at half price. If you're already watching this on Skills, congrats and welcome. This course is really set to get you comfortable using the Linux command line. And for those of you, which I suspect is a lot of you, who have never used Linux before, never used a Linux command line, just go ahead and knock that fear off, jump right into it, and we're gonna, have a lot of fun doing it in the process. So what will we be covering in this course? Simple, Linux command line basics. That's it, nothing else. So what is the Linux command line or the command shell, or the shell, which you'll sometime hear it referred to? It's the under the hood of Linux. It's more powerful than the GUI, and it gives you access to the native scripting language in Linux called Bash. And you'll see why that's useful a little bit later on in the course. So let's jump right into it. Why command shell? Well, if you're doing a technical cybersecurity job, you will likely spend some time on the command line. If you take a technical cybersecurity course, you will then spend some time on the command line for sure. When you hack a Windows machine from another machine, it's usually going to start with a command line. So all of these things and all of these are reasons for you to get into learning how to use a Linux command line, and most importantly, being comfortable there. So let's get right to it. Now, part of the reason I'm starting with the Infosec Skills portion of this is because I want you to see how you can, again, put yourself in a position to teach yourself in addition to what I'm going to show you now. So for example, if we go to the penetration testing cyber range, so in your skills account, you want to go right to cyber ranges, go to penetration testing, and we're going to start with the Linux fundamentals. So once your Linux and terminal comes up, which it may take, a few minutes for yours to come up, but once it does, you'll be here. And one of the reasons I subscribe to people that are completely 100% brand new to Linux to maybe start with skills is because of the fact that not only are you about to learn these commands, but it's also going to tell you if you got it right or wrong and give you feedback. Now it starts off with the ls command. If you took the Windows command line version of this course, which is really the course right before this one in the path, what you would have learned is in the world of Linux, we do the dir command to find out which current directory we're in Windows. Well, if we do dir in Linux, I want to show you something. It will actually show you your directory contents, even though we associate dir with Windows. So there are some commands that are cross operating system. However, we encourage you to, in the Linux world, to use ls because it is transferable across most distros of Linux, whereas dir only works on some. Okay. So if we do what the instructions say, you're going to be greeted with a nice surprise here. It says enter the ls command to see what's in your directory. I go ahead and enter ls. And when I type the command correctly, it gives me this big positive, happy, gushy green thumb to let me know I did it exactly right. Nothing like a confidence booster there. So if I go ahead and say next, it says, great, now we're going to look at flags. And it's talking about these little things like -LA that you put behind the Linux command line. What you can learn is if I were to want to learn more about the ls command, and you'll see this later in this little session, I can just do man ls and it'll show me all the things that you need to know or all the things that you can do with the ls command, all the flags. So we see there the -A means all. If we keep looking, scrolling down, we'll see that the -L means long format. Let's just get to it here. So you can see it says use a long listing format. And what that really means, and by the way, to get out of the man page, you type the Q command. If we just do ls by itself, see how it just shows us a shortened version of the names? if we do ls with the L, it shows us the file name, when it was created, like the timestamp, the directory permissions, like the group ownership, the user, the permissions over here, read, write, execute, special, whatever it may have. Shows us all kinds of information. Again, here's just ls. And here's if we use ls with the -L, you see a lot more information about each file. Now, if we add the -A to that, let's look at what we get there. So notice we see just a few files there. But when I add the -A, watch what happens. There's more files. There are files that begin with the dot. Now, in the world of Linux, when a file begins with a dot, it means it's a hidden file. So what you're looking at there is when you do the -A, it not only shows you the files that you can see, it shows you the ones you can't see. It shows you the hidden files as well. So all these dots, like the Android file that begins with the dot, the bash history file that begins with the dot, those are hidden because if we just do an ls, you don't see the bash history file anywhere in here. You see bash and you see bash snippet, but you don't see bash history. If we do the A, now you can see that there is a bash history file. So the -A shows you everything, including hidden. The -L shows you long format. If you combine those, what do you get? Well, you get all files and you get the long format. And as you can see there, you also get the green thumb from Skills that says you did a great job. All right. So now we're moving on to step 3, basic Linux usage with the pwd command. What this command does is it shows you what directory you're currently in. Pwd is literally short for print working directory. In other words, what's my current directory? And why this is so important is for most people that come from a Windows background, they struggle with understanding Linux directory structure, and this tremendously helps you with that. So if I type the command pwd, you can see it actually gives me the green thumb, but it also shows me you're in the home admin directory. In other words, that's my current directory. Now, if you think back when we did the Windows command line course, one of the first things we looked at, or one of the important things we looked at, was how do we look at running Windows processes from the command line? Well, now we're looking at running Linux processes from the command line. And I want to show you that all A's are not created equal. So if we do PS-A, you see all these running processes. But I want to show you something. If we do PS-lowercase a, we only see 2 processes. And what it is the lowercase a is only showing you your current processes, like the root processes or system processes. The capital A is showing all processes, which is why we got the green thumb. Now, we also introduced you in the Windows command line course to the pipe symbol and what that means. It means you're taking data from one command and sending it to another, or output from one command and sending it to the other. When we run the command PS-A by itself, notice a lot of the data runs off the screen like that. So now we got to do this scrolling back up to see everything. Well, we can pipe that output to something called more. And what more does is it'll only show us 1 page's worth of data at a time. And we can hit enter to go a line at a time down. Notice it's going from one line to the next. Or we could do space and do a page at a time. Okay. But either way, it allows you to slow down and look at all the data on that page before proceeding to the next page. Now, the next thing it shows you is how to use more to read files. So for example, we can read this file, more Etsy services. And the significance of Etsy services doesn't mean anything to you right now. It's just a file that they picked for you to read because we know it's there. So the key here, the learning point, is just the command more. right? So if I use more to read Etsy services, what you see is instead of it again scrolling all the way to the end of that big file, it allows me to go one line at a time past that first page, or a page at a time using the space bar like we're doing there. Right? Now, the next thing is Pseudo, and let me explain what that is. In the world of Linux, we try to not give people root permissions or admin permissions. What we do is we put them in a group called the sudoers group, or add them to a file called the sudoers list, which means that to do some things, they're allowed to run as root. That's the purpose of the sudoers group. So in this particular case, this user is actually able to run tshark with sudo. Now, just kind of as a bonus piece of information here, if you ever want to know what commands you can run as root from your currently logged in user context, you can always type the command sudo-l, and it'll show you everything that you're able to run as root. Okay, which in this case is not a lot of stuff. Now, basically anything that's in this path, you can run it as. So we're going to run tshark. And again, the lesson here is not tshark itself. The lesson here is sudo, and it's just showing you that you can run tshark with sudo and run it as root. And notice you don't have the green thumb yet. That's because it's actually not going to give it to you until the program actually starts. And sudo starts up successfully, or excuse me, tshark starts up successfully. Now you can actually see that it's running. Now what it has you do next is migrate to another console just by clicking console. If you are on a real Linux terminal, we do their Alt F keys. So if we wanted to open a new terminal, we do Alt F2 and it opened a second terminal. But in this case, we're just going to click over to that new terminal, and it tells you to look at the running processes. And how many of you remember from the Windows command line course, I introduced you to something that we could use to look for specific strings. It wasn't grep, and what I said was it's something like what we use in Linux. In Linux we use grep, but in Windows it's what? Something called find string, or a find str. But in Linux we can actually say grep, and we can grep for the string tshark. And we can see here's our tshark process. And just like in Windows, it has a process identifier. In this case, it's 1883. One of the other things I showed you in Windows was how to kill this process. Now in Windows, we use the command called TaskKill. In Linux, we just kill it. We don't need to say task, we just kill it, right? And because we're killing a process, that is something that requires generally elevated privileges. So we're going to have to do sudo. We're going to say kill, and we're going to do -9. Now I want to remind you of something. In Windows, we did TaskKill space / PID, then gave it the PID, and then we did a /F. In Windows /F in that command means force it. In other words, if it tries to resist you or if it tries to not shut down, force it to shut down anyways. Well, the Linux equivalent to that in the kill command is this 9. So the -9 is like a force in Windows. And then we have to give it the actual PID. In this case, it's 1883. And it successfully killed it. How do we know that? Because the next step here, it has you grep for tshark again. And now we see there is no tshark running, so therefore we know we killed the tshark process. Right? Now moving on to the next step here. Now it's showing you how to use the man pages, which is like help files. So for every command, you have to check to see if there's a man page if you're struggling with that command. I will tell you that not every application that you run in Linux will have a man page associated, but in this case, PS does. So let's do man PS. And you can see that it shows us all the different things we can do with PS. Right? So we're going to go ahead and quit out of man and move on to the next step here. Now, another important fundamental Linux thing is being able to create text files and things of that nature from the command line. If we looked in this current directory right now, you can see that there is no file named Infosec Rocks. What this command is doing is by using that is greater than, we're saying, hey, cat command, create a file named Infosec Rocks and put me in that file so I can put some data in it. So notice no Infosec Rocks up here right now. So if I go ahead and do cat Infosec Rocks like it says, it gives me the confirmation there, and then it puts me in that file. Now if I type a string, and then it says hit enter and then do Control D. Well, what we just did is we just created essentially a file named Infosec Rocks. And this next step here has us use cat to read that file. Now let's pause. What other command that we look at earlier? What other command that we learn about that we can use to read files? We learned how to use more. So if I do more Infosec Rocks, we can see that it did create a file named Infosec Rocks, and what's in that file is this text that says Infosec is a great place to learn, right? Now, the command here wants us to use cat, so let's be obedient. We'll use cat. And now we can clearly see that Infosec is a great place to learn skills is actually in that file, and it's happy with us for doing that. Now, on the next step, it has us to do append. So the single is greater than is used to create a file. If we use two is greater than, that appends or adds to a file. And we know that we've already got our file, Infosec Rocks, that exists there. And I want you to notice a little tip that I taught you in the Windows course. Notice how fast I type that. Do you really think I'm that fast of a typist? Let me just tell you a secret, I'm not. What I did there was when I typed and then I just did info tab, it auto completed that because Infosec Rocks exists. So now I just read it and it took me to the next step to where we can continue on. So now we're going to go ahead and use the two is greater than's to append. All right. And it puts us in the file. So now we're going to, let's just do that again. We're going to add the string something like that. Control D again. Now if we read Infosec Rocks, you'll see that it's got two strings in there. So we had this first string when we created it, and now we just added or appended the second one using the two is greater than's. So always remember that in Windows and Linux, one is greater than means write it to a file. Two is greater than's, how can we do that with our fingers? Two is greater than's means append or add to that file, okay? Then we get into some basic networking here. For example, IPA. Now I want to caution you on something, and I'm going to switch between VMs here. So this is Kali, which is running on Debian. If I run IPA, it shows me IP address information. But keep in mind, this Debian distro is customized because if I do Ifconfig, it says I don't know what that command is. And this is the most common way that people are taught to look at IP information in Linux is using Ifconfig. Now watch this. If I go to my Kali VM that I've got running locally here, and I run the command ifconfig, it actually does give me IP information, but it also gives me IP information if I do IPA. So I want you to be careful of that and understand that different distributions with different configurations may give you some trouble with some commands, but that's also part of the beauty of Linux being open source is people customize it and make it whatever they want it to be. All right. So back to our little safe environment here. it has us to do cat Etsy services. And we talked about this earlier, how, the real learn here is the fact that we can get to Etsy services. Now, again, do you think I typed that out? Nope. I did cat/et tab, SER tab to read Etsy services. But for those of you that are at home or at work or wherever watching this, that's part of the game. That's part of the illusion that you see. You think I'm super fast at typing this stuff. You think I'm some elite person because I'm going really fast with these things. I'm using the tab completion for a big chunk of it to get me through the exercise. Now, if I do cat Etsy and then I just do SER tab, it autocompletes services is what it's showing you. But here's the thing, and where you have to be careful. If I do cat Etsy and watch this, watch closely. I'm just going to do SE without the R, no R, and tab, and look at what it does. It says, look, there are 7 different files or folders that begin with the string SE. I have no possible way of knowing which one you're referring to, so give me more specifics about the one you're looking for. So I go ahead and add an R, boom, and tab again, and then it auto completes it because now it knows, well, there's only one that has an R after the E, and that's services. So sometimes when you do the tab completion, there may be more than one file that meets that criteria. For example, if I did cat S, right, it shows me that, look, there's 3 different files in here that start with S. But if I did SI or SN, then it only has sniffing that meets that criteria. So when you're using autocomplete, you still have to know something about, or a little bit about, what you're trying to autocomplete your way to. Now, one of the last important commands that it shows you here is the history command. Now, why this is ingenious and it's valuable is because if you're learning something, it's helpful at the end of the day or at the end of that exercise to be able to see the history of every command you've typed. So watch this. I'm going to do history. And now you can see every command we've typed during this little session. Why that's useful is you can actually write that out to a file, because remember, we learned how to do this. So let's do is greater than keytron history. Now we've got a file in there named keytron history. And if we read that file, it's actually a history of all the commands that I typed. Now, I want to show you a real history file, for example, and this is the end of that exercise in the skills environment. This is why I think it's important to try to get yourself into skills, because you can not only learn, but you get the confirmation if you did it right or not, and you can kind of teach yourself a little bit better in here. But I'm going to go to my Kali VM to show you a little more Linux and get into a few more advanced concepts here. Now, when you did the history command, why this is useful, I can write out my history to a file. Let's just call it keytron history here. Then I can go in and edit that file. And I can write notes to myself about my history. For example, I can tell myself, oh, this is where I was reading the Wireshark capture from David's traffic. Right? I can write myself a note there and say that. So when I come back and look at my history of like 1,000 commands from a month ago, I can know what specifically I was doing in this command. So that's why writing your history out to a file is useful. And this is why being able to read your history is useful. One more thing on history that makes it really, really powerful in Linux. One of the commands that we use a lot is something called Nmap. Okay. And I told you that I was going to have you go through a series of exercises to help you remember that stuff. And part of that's going to be taking some history files, pulling together some commonalities, and then putting those out as an exercise. But if I type the command history, remember we had something called grep that we can pipe things out to. I can grep for Nmap and see just my Nmap commands and not see everything else. I can only see my Nmap commands, right? This is why grep is very, very useful. Now, how do we use things like that in the real world? Well, look at, let's say I'm targeting Yahoo, okay? And I do a DNS recon, and you don't need to know this tool. This is strictly for demonstration purposes of how we use grep. And I'm looking for yahoo.com as my target domain. Well, I'm going to go out and enumerate specifically Yahoo's domain information. Now, we can see that Yahoo has a IP address at 68.180.131.16. So I might assume that, well, if they own that address, they probably own that entire network range. Let's see if we can prove that. So I can come in and do a DNS recon again. And again, don't try to learn these commands yet. You don't need to worry about DNS recon. The output of what I'm about to show you is what's going to matter. So if I assume Yahoo owns that entire range and I check, and it looks like they kind of do, because all these devices come back as yahoo.com devices. I can do the same, for example, for Mississippi State. So if I did DNS recon, let's just do this. And I take that 130.18.80.12 network and assume they own that entire range. Well, what you see, and this is something I actually we go into detail with this in some of the more advanced classes like ethical hacking that I teach. But now if I take this and say, look, let's check that entire range, because the IP address can go from 1 to 254, essentially. We can see that this really does appear to be the Mississippi State network because they all end in msstate.edu. Now, why is grep important? Because you could have thousands of results here. Now, watch what happens. If I take that, how do I get this to a way that I can grep it? Well, I can write it to a file. We learn how to do that. Right? Now I can cat that file because we learn how to do that as well. And then I can grep for things that may be important. Now, this is a college. This is a university. So maybe the string faculty would be something of importance. So if I grep for faculty, I get just hits on that. And as a hacker, I would consider this to be a significant find because they have a device on their network named faculty credentials. So as a hacker, I'm definitely going to target that. Now, we're able to pull this out of thousands of records because we know what we're looking for. And more importantly, we know how to use things like grep to pull out the things that matter. Now, another string I might look for in an organization is things like test, because we know that when people build servers and build infrastructure, their test stuff is not as locked down as their production stuff. So as an attacker, I might automatically start trying to attack or look for vulnerabilities in their test equipment because I know they haven't patched it as well as they have their production equipment. Okay. So this puts me in a position where these things like grep and all of this basic stuff that I'm showing you, you got to get to where you're comfortable with that. I mean, think about it. You use your hands and your feet and your eyes. You don't think about using your hands, feet, and eyes. When you get ready to go drive your car to the grocery store, you don't think about, well, let me learn how to use my hands. You've done it so much that it's second nature. What I want for you is I want grep and cut and awk and all these other commands and cat and all these other commands that we're learning. Those should become second nature to you. They're like tools, like your hands and feet, to where you don't really have to think about using them. You're trying to get to an end goal, and you know that this tool can give you this information from this information. That's really what it's all about, and why we're focusing on trying to get you to get these things under your hands before you get into a, cybersecurity boot camp or something like that. Right? Now, another slick thing that I want to show you about history. Okay. If we type the command history, you can see all your commands, and I even showed you how we can grep for just, for example, Nmap. But what if we wanted to enter commands we've entered previously? A trick that I've done, I did it in Windows, but I didn't really teach it, but I'm going to teach it now. If you hit your up arrow, it cycles back through the commands that you've entered in the order that you've entered them in reverse. So we're going back up through every command we've entered in reverse. Even back before I recorded this course, we're going all the way back through my command history just by hitting up arrow. Now, what if I wanted to go back through my history, but only for the Nmap command? I could do that. There's something called reverse grep. If I do Control R, that brings up that little weird string. And now if I start typing the command Nmap, and then if I just do Control R repeatedly as a toggle, it's toggling through all the Nmap commands that I've entered. Just the Nmap commands. So again, that's absolutely powerful, and it can save you a ton of time when you're dealing with trying to go back and see the command you entered 6 weeks ago, for example. Very, very important stuff and very useful for you as you dig into the Windows command line. The purpose of this course is I don't want to overwhelm you with every possible command that you can learn in Linux. What I want you to do is do the ones that we covered over and over again until that whole thing that we talked about gets in your head. Remember, one of the things that I said earlier is if I gave you this command and said, type that, you could type that and whip it out just like that without even really thinking about it, because you're not actually reading each character in these words. You're just reading the words and you're typing it blindly. But if I gave you this, and told you to type that, you would struggle to type it and take longer, because most of these strings are strings you've never typed before, not in this combination. So your brain can't form those connections and auto create the words so where you're just typing them fluently. That won't happen until you get these commands under your belt to where suddenly you're used to typing -s or -su or -ss. -p is something that you've typed a few hundred times, so it doesn't break your thought process when you have to type that. And that's what it boils down to. Now, hopefully these commands and these processes will make it to where you will be able to go forward and get them under your belts to where when you go into other courses that are cybersecurity related, you've already got these things that gives you a leg up on the people who don't have it. Thank you for watching this course, and I hope you get something out of it. If you want more content from me, you can find it at infosecinstitute.com/author/Keitron Evans.